Howdy once again, it's tubalcain, and this is part 3 of my series on how to buy a South Bend lathe. And this little Model A 9-inch South Bend lathe is just the perfect example for you to see some of the things that you don't want to find on a lathe that you purchase. It is not in real good shape, but if you haven't seen this video, be sure and check it out. And that's the day that I bought it. It shows me loading it in Batavia, Illinois. Now, a great viewer by the name of Michael, no last name am I going to give you, from Batavia, contacted me out of the clear blue sky and said that there's a shop closing up there. They own the building, and would I come up and help them with a few things. And then upon leaving there, and his father was there too, and they're both wonderful men, I said, that little South Bend lathe for sale? And he said, well, it might be. Well, a month later he called me, I know I'm talking a lot, and said, you can have the lathe for the price we discussed, but when I got there, I had to purchase it from a man who I believe was a salvager or a junk man or a third-party buyer or whatever, and he's the man that I had to deal with. When I first looked at the lathe, there was a large amount of accessories and so on a shelf back here. I think the shelf was laying on the table. I'm talking about chucks and tool holders and I don't know what all, including a lot of junk, and then also things on the shelves below it. But the day I arrived to pick it up, and I paid this third-party man, whom we might call Tony, as a pseudonym, but all of the other parts were gone. All the accessories were gone. Well, the price on the lathe was reasonable enough to, I just went ahead and bought it anyway. But the only thing that came with it was the chuck, the tool holder, and the chuck key. Everything else was gone. I have contacted him several times. He said that he might be able to find those parts or whatever happened to him. And I never did hear from him again, so that's gone. Furthermore, he said, you didn't want the table too, did you? I said, well, yeah, I thought that came with it. He said, well, I want it, but I guess you can have it, and I had to fork over an extra, it was either 25 or 50 bucks for that. So, the guy was a dealer. But I'm still happy with the machine. I am going to go over some of the features and problems with it now. Again, it's a Model A, and that's the serial number. It's probably built in the late 40s, maybe the early 50s, I do not know for sure. There's the catalog number. It's a 9-inch swing with a 3-foot bed. And remember that this is a 10-inch disc, but a 9-inch disc or wheel would fit in there. And it is a short bed. The 3-foot bed allows you about 16 inches between center. And there were no extra jaws for the 3-jaw chuck either. Now let me back up just a minute and talk about the South Bend Lathe Company. I know I've talked a lot about that, but I also have this parts catalog here, and this came with the other South Bend that I bought and that is in my South Bend course, and I did retain this, and I'm glad I did. And look at that, it was 50 bucks. And I printed it in 1995, and I think that was the final days of the South Bend lathe when they were trying to survive and sell parts or whatever they could do to continue in business, but it didn't work. The lathe that I'm using for this demonstration is indeed a 9-inch Model A South Bend lathe, but let me just take a moment here to tell you the difference between Model A, B, and C, and this is taken from Vintage Machinery. That's Keith Rucker's site, and the 1943 catalog from South Bend, and you can see now, this is the same one here in the demonstration, that it's got the quick change gearbox, and notice the apron here, which has the half nut lever, the feed change lever, and the clutch. Here's the Model B, which you do not see very often, but it's very similar to the other one, except that it does not have a quick change gearbox. So it would come with a set of change gears. Notice they're all table models, and but can be fitted with legs from the factory originally. Also notice that they came with a 3-foot bed, a 3.5-foot bed, a 4-foot bed, or a 4.5-foot bed. And finally is the Model C, and that is the original one that I had from my dad, only on cast iron legs, and I sold it. And notice that it does not have a quick change gearbox, and notice the difference in the apron here. It has only a half nut to move the carriage back and forth. There is no clutch, no feed change lever, so the apron is totally different. This was the cheapest, or the cheaper, of the three. I hope that clarifies A, B, and C in the 9-inch models, and the variations in lengths and in the legs, or however you're going to fit this up in your own shop. So as you're shopping for one of these, you may see variations just shown here. Remember that the South Bend Company was formed in 1906 by the O'Brien brothers. Well, one of them died in by 1935, and the other one died right after the Second World War, so I think they floundered without their leadership. But things changed here in America, and by 1959 the company was so troubled that they were bought out by the American Steel Company, which was called the Amstead Industries at that time, and they moved some of the works into the Studebaker plant right across the street, which had only recently gone bankrupt, if you remember Studebaker. And so Amstead ran it for a while, but by 1975 there were more troubles, and it's all financial, and it became employee owned, and that worked for a while. But of all things, the employees struck against the management, even though they owned it, and that pretty much was the end of South Bend Lathe as we know it. And then in 2009 the brand was bought by Grizzly Industrial, and you'll see the South Bend lathes are shown in their catalog. They're reincarnated, they're made in China, but they are their top of the line lathe in the Grizzly catalog. So be sure and look at the Grizzly catalog, and the 9 or the 10-inch retain that beautiful appearance of the 10-inch lathe that I've showed in the previous video. They also have milling machines and other things that are branded, and if you visit their store in Springfield, Missouri, you'll find great archival photos on the wall back by the ladies' lounge, and those are interesting to look at. I showed some of those in a video, I believe. This was their logo for a while there, I think when it was owned by Amstead. And this catalog here, called South Bend Accessories from 1973, and I remember having this at school, showed all of the beautiful South Bend accessories. And then essentially the same catalog with most of the same parts here in 1998, and that's their logo at that time. And that might have been right about at the end of what they were doing. And you can see from this that they were trying to make the move here, and they were showing a digital readout. Looks kind of crude now, but some other electronic things, and they had quite a large line of other machinery at that time too. And there it is, what looked to be pretty modern lathes, but all of that again did not save the company, and there's their beautiful original logo. They had punch presses and all kinds of other things, but unfortunately they went under. I have done very little cleanup on this lathe since the day I bought it, other than to clean off the top of the table and the majority of the chips. But in another video you saw me make the belt cover here, so that's all been lubricated, cleaned, painted, the motor checked out and rewired, as you saw. But looking at it from this headstock end here, I spent quite a bit of time talking about the 10-inch lathe and the spindle size. And again, the 9-inch lathe has a 1.5 by 8 thread on the spindle, which leaves only a 7/8 hole here, so it's a relatively small bore, and 7/8 is about the largest stock that can run through the spindle. And I do have a collet attachment for this that fits on one of my other lathes, and it will fit in here, but those 3C collets only hold up to about 9/16, I believe it is. Now take a look. I did blow the chips off, but look at the amount of chips here that are in the gears. Again, that's all caused by cleaning with air. But one other thing to note here is as you're turning, holding your work on the chuck or whatever the operation is, a lot of chips come clear through the spindle and then fall down into the gears. So it's a good idea to put a piece of steel wool or a rag or something in there if you don't need the full spindle hole, and that prevents chips from ending up where you see here in the gears, causing wear and just a mess. By the way, Michael, thanks to you and your father, and I don't mean to sound ungrateful about any of this, but because I'm in a way criticizing the other man that I dealt with, but again, this was a low-price lathe, and I'm like you. I get excited about things, and my heart starts thumping. I'll just say, I'll take it. But there's plenty wrong with this lathe, and this is just a perfect example to show you some of these things. But looking here, first of all, somebody was pretty overzealous here and cleaned up this tag with a rather harsh abrasive, and it took a lot of the detail off. But looking again with the mirror down here and a flashlight, you can examine the gears, and they do look okay on my cursory checkup here, but packed, of course, with chips. Although I have seen worse. Let's go up to the top side. This is a 12-speed lathe. That's 3 steps here on the flat pulley, 2 steps back on the motor pulley, and the back gears gives a combination of 12 speeds, same as the 10-inch. And let's take a look at the gears now first. And I took the liberty of removing the cover here, because it's not like an Atlas lathe where you can quickly see the back gears, and it'd be quite a bit more work to take this cover off, and I'm not going to do that, at least not for now. I've taken 2 screws off. That allows me to get this cover off, which is kind of dirty, but you'd expect it to be. And now we can examine the gears on the back gear here. Let me release the tension. And they all look good. But let's now look at the back shaft here. If I can spin that off, and I cut the power. Those gears look a lot. Oh no, there. Can you see that? Does that show up? There's a missing tooth. Exactly what we don't want to find. So that's really, really bad. And I haven't run into, I didn't know that till right now. I hope you can sense it in my voice. Could well have been caused by someone trying to remove a stuck chuck. But since it's really dirty, it didn't happen recently. Now that gear would be easier to replace than this. That is, as far as the mechanics of switching, because you wouldn't have to take the spindle. But that's real bad news, that I've got a tooth missing out of that back gear. I've taken the chuck off, and I haven't indicated it to see how accurate it is, but I'm sure it's probably not very good. And again, the spare jaws, if they were there when I first examined it, they're gone now. And if you go back and look at that video I talked about, you're going to see that that shop was being cleared out that day. And anything that looked like junk was thrown away. The spindle itself, and I've looked at this before, and the thread there looks good, so that's a relief. But then again, this lathe is probably 65 years old, and it looks like it was rode hard and put away wet. Now let's take a look at the bed. I have not cleaned the bed yet. Well, I did wipe these off and put a little oil on them so that it would move freely, but you can see all of the dirt and crud on there yet. And let me wipe that just real quickly here, but you can see that there's a lot of grime on there. I don't think this has been cleaned since 1951. So with that much dirt on a machine, when it's in a shop and you're examining it, it's pretty hard to judge. But I see the usual nicks that you're going to find on a lathe, and I don't even worry about that so much because that's inevitable. But again, we're going to see wear right here, and it is considerable. Matter of fact, that is terrible, and it's just like that 10-inch that in the last video, but we shouldn't have that step there at all, and it's considerable. I can catch my thumbnail on there so easily, and taking this Mitutoyo ruler, however thick it is, I don't care, but you know, when I lay that up against there, like that, up against the step, it's pretty smooth transition. So I'm going to tell you right now that the wear there is about the thickness of this ruler. And that goes for the other way on the back. And then if you follow this here toward the headstock, you can see how it gets to be less and less because the headstock did not travel there. So now I'm right below the gears, and there's no wear there. Obviously, why would there be? That I expect. Will it cause inaccuracies? You bet. And we won't really know until we put indicators on there, and I don't intend to do that. Or start to take cuts on the project and then measure to see if we're getting a taper. Because what is happening when your bed is and your ways are worn, it's almost sway back. So as your carriage travels along and comes into that low spot, it's dipping down, which in turn causes the cutting tool to drop down lower on the cylindrical work, and the amount of the depth of cut in effect is changing slightly, if you can understand what I mean by that. But what causes that wear? Well, not cleaning it well, the wipers are dirty or not working and not lubricating it, and just the general friction from passing over the same area perhaps hundreds of thousands of times. So, you know, friction causes wear. Friction causes heat. I'm getting carried away. I'm overzealous. But let's look here too at other things. The nut is missing here, and it looks like somebody just drove a pin or something in there to lock the crank onto that screw. The set screw is missing for the collar. I don't know if it's broken off, haven't looked that close. Look at the amount of backlash, almost a half a turn. Or maybe I should say it is a half a turn, let's see. It's more than half a turn. All of that wear is in the crossfeed screw and the brass nut in there. Now that really isn't all that big a problem because you can compensate for that by always eliminating the backlash by cranking back, and you'd have to do that anyway because even a brand new lathe is going to have some backlash, perhaps this much, but certainly not that much. But that's the first time I checked that. Similarly up here, we have less because of course there isn't as much feeding done with the cross slide, but the little knurled clamping screw is missing, and somebody put in a round head. At least it came with a tool post, but that's pretty rusty. No tool holders at all. But we've got some holes that were drilled in here for whatever reason, and somewhere here where the corner of the compound has hit the chuck. Again, you got to expect that. That's just going to happen. Unless it was a little old Swiss or German tool maker that used it and nobody else touched the lathe. The backlash that I just showed you in the crank here also translates to the backlash right here. Can you see how many? We could put an indicator on there and find out how much it's moving, but it's some of that can probably be tightened up. I see a bit of a gap here, if you can watch that. But what I really wanted to show you here in this little segment is the difference in size between the 9-inch and 10-inch compound. So you can see that this compound, that's off the 10-inch that I had showed you in the previous video, that is considerably more massive than this one is. Also notice that we have the large, easy to read dials here compared to these teeny tiny little things that are just a murder on a 70-year-old man's eyes. And in later models, these would also be satin chrome. And these are not. These are steel, and I did have to clean these up. They had a little bit of light rust on the 10-inch. And you can see we got some rust here on the cranks, but that'll come off easily enough. That's real light rust. This lathe, of course, needs thorough cleaning, painting, adjusting, and repairs where it's easily possible to do it. I bought this lathe specifically to make videos such as what I'm doing today. So I may not do that. I'm beyond enjoying cleaning and painting. It's just something to me now that has become drudgery. Continuing now with a discussion on these compounds, this again 9-inch, 10-inch, but notice the difference the way the gib is made. There's the gib there, doesn't show up, there's the gib. And it's adjusted by tightening the 4 gib screws, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I've talked about that quite a bit. But on this one, the gib again is right there, but it is adjusted with this screw. It can be locked right there, so in order to adjust it, you would loosen that screw and tighten this screw, and that would drive the gib in, which is a tapered gib. The nice thing about this is sometimes you want to tighten your gib for an operation, that is, you don't want any movement here, so all you would have to do here is loosen that, tighten that a little bit, and that gib is locked, and this isn't going to turn. It's a little more effort with this, although you could lock this gib just by screwing one of them in real tight and effectively lock it to prevent chatter and vibration and movement. In the other video where I work on the belt guard, you will remember I pointed out that the original turnbuckle is long gone, and some hammer mechanic put on an aluminum turnbuckle there to tension the belt. I do not like that at all, but it does function. Looking at the carriage now, and you may or may not be able to do this when you look at a lathe to buy it, but with the feed change lever in the middle position, the half nut lever works fine. Now the feed change lever is in the upper position, and by the way, all of this is covered in great detail in my 40-chapter series instructional course called How to Run a South Bend Lathe. So longitudinal feed works. And crossfade works. Although it sure sounded like it was laboring even at that light feed. But that mechanism needs to work. It does work. It needs to be cleaned up and adjusted, I'm sure. Remember that I got a nice threading dial on here, and glad to see that the carriage lock is in place and functions. Lead screw is pretty good, or did I mention that already? The tailstock is not too great. Let me show you a few things that I don't like. Look at the slop we got right here, and someone has tampered with this. I don't believe there's supposed to be a set screw. I think it was pinned and key, and there should be a nut on the end of the shaft here, and there is not. I don't know if it's broken off or modified or what someone has done to that. The end of the quill itself is quite buggered up, like someone has hammered on it right here. And there is an awful lot of wear on the quill. I can wiggle it. This is old enough to where it has the little hole here for a dauber, which I talked extensively about in other videos for the center. In other words, they hadn't hardly invented live centers or ball bearing centers at that time. The handle here is bent. You can feel that when you turn it, that this is not perpendicular to the wheel. So, which means what? It means there was a hammerman. The original wrench was missing, probably sitting there and got thrown away or whatever happened to all that other stuff. So I cut off a box end wrench that will fit there, and you know, it does function, but I like the looks of the original wrenches very much. Let's take a look what's inside of here, and I do have a picture that a man sent me of a cutaway of a Atlas lathe, so we'll look at that in a minute. But I've already loosened this up with a wrench, and I backed this screw out far enough to where the quill is loose. But that's what it looks like. This, of course, is a left-hand thread, and the thread doesn't look too bad. In other words, it looks to have the same form here as it does in the middle. There is a thrust bearing in here. That needs to be cleaned up, and this is what I wanted to point out to you, that normally there's a nut there, but look at, somebody has ground on it. Perhaps you can see from here that the handle is bent. Maybe you can't tell. And very rough, which means people were banging on it. Now when we look at the quill, now that I can get that out, you can see that it's pretty rough there. And I don't know if we can look inside of it or not, but probably needs to have, that's a number 2 Morse taper. You can see that it's pretty rough in there, but that's typical, very typical. But now I want to show you what I think is going to be the worst part of this tailstock and virtually every tailstock that I look at, and there's nothing you can do about it other than to shim it. But let me take this off real quick and show you what the bottom looks like, or what I think it's going to look like. I received an email today from one Mr. Andy Roth, and it was most timely in that I was just talking about tailstocks. But he sent me a picture of a Atlas lathe tailstock, and he had bought several lathes, one of them strictly for parts, and the quill was absolutely frozen in the tailstock casting. So since he had nothing to lose, he pulled a tubalcain, knowing how much I love cutaways, and he made a cutaway of this tailstock, which would be built very similar, if not identical, to the South Bend. But take a look what we have here, the quill within its casting, and there's the left-hand threaded screw, which I showed you moments ago, and there's I believe that's the thrust bearing, and then the male thread and the female thread holding that casting in the end, and there's the other piece that he sawed out of there, and the other thread. Now what is not shown here, there is a key. You know, the quill has a key way on the bottom, so there's a key coming up there. But that's how they're built, and that's how you sometimes have to take them apart. Take them apart. Thank you, Andy. It's interesting to see a cutaway, and it appears he likes a cutaway as much as I do. Serial numbers on all South Bend lathes are right down here near the end of the bed, and this one also has a number here. I don't know what that means, but it's number B100NK. In my opinion, South Bend lathes are made with a relatively soft cast iron bed that wears rapidly. Now later models or special models had flame hardened beds, which I think improved it, but I think this is soft cast iron too. And this is actually, I'm going to say, 10 times worse than what I expected. So let me wipe this off just a little bit here. And the wear is so uniform and so bad that you'll almost think that it was meant to be that way. Now I got this setting in a vise here, so I'm trying to but it's slipping. Let me get this wiped off and situated a little better and take just a short break here. Get yourself a cup of coffee. Now I'm sure that there's plenty of wear right along here, but it isn't apparent because of its uniformity. But it's more apparent down on this surface here, and you might say, oh, that's machined nicely. No, it isn't. This was one flat, smooth surface when it came out of the factory. That's a groove that's worn in there. And it is considerable. What can you do about that? Not much other than to have it ground, but that means you'd also have to have the ways ground and the bottom of the apron ground and just everything rebuilt in order for it to all line up again. Now some people say, well, to compensate for that, if I can loosen this up just a little bit, and I could mic that and tell you how much it is, but some people say to shim it in here between that, but I don't know how you're going to do that and get it right, because you can be sure that there is more wear on one end than on the other. This feels so much deeper right here, and this is the quill end. Feels so much deeper here than it is here, so it's tapered. What causes that? Millions of movements back and forth, also chips under there. I'm sure that chips are in there. You need to keep your bed clean, your ways clean, and the bottom of this, take it off, and you need oil in there every day. So it slides, not rubs. Let me put this back on to the lathe and talk about what the problems that this causes. Because of that wear, you can be sure that the distance, if we had a center in there, do I have, yeah. If we could measure from the bed up to the center, it would be a different height here than it is on the headstock end, because that doesn't travel. There is no movement here, so there would be absolutely no wear under the headstock. So what happens here is that when you go to drill a hole, a center hole, or whatever you're doing, a reamer, your reamer does not enter the hole squarely or at the right height. And you've seen in some of my videos where I'm drilling a hole and all of a sudden, boop, the drill jumps up. Or more dramatically, when I draw the reamer out of a hole or something like that, you can see the reamer flex and drop down as it leaves the hole. And that's caused by that kind of wear. Furthermore, not only is that height incorrect now, but since there's more wear on one end than the other here, this whole thing is tilted. Not that much, of course, but this whole thing is at an angle. That can be checked with indicators, but it's also difficult to check because everything else on the machine is cockeyed unless you can hold your indicator on a sky hook. So that is a major problem, but I see that on every old lathe I ever look at. I don't intend to do anything about it. And in other videos, I'll be using this lathe and perhaps see if it is capable of accurate work. And they say that some of these old machinists, you know, with ancient machinery, I'm talking about 100 years ago, they could lean on the machine or they could back the tool out because they knew where the dimension was going to change due to wear on the lathe. But boy, that would take a lot of experience, and believe me, I think that's still baguette-bagache, and you're not going to work to close tolerances with this old machinery unless you're a genius, which I am not. I've made no effort to check the spindle bearings, but you know, on South Bend lathes, if this was built anything like that 9-inch that I had, there are shims that can be removed here. These are like a bronze bearing in there. They are not ball bearings, they are not roller bearings, tapered roller bearings. Another thing on this lathe, you will notice here, let me zero in on something and wiggle the bench. See if you see movement. I have mounted this rather sturdy table on casters. Well, you say, why did you do that? Well, I have so many lathes here in this shop that I like to move them around without anybody else's help. So I got casters under there which allow me to do that, and I can move them up and back and forth under my work lights here, my filming lights, and those casters can be easily removed. But the problem is now this lathe is at a relatively great height, and I'm built at a relatively low level, so my chin comes up to the compound here right now, so it's high. But this would be perfect for my neighbor who's a gunsmith and has a bad back, and he has his bench and everything else built up so he doesn't have to bend as he works. But then again, I digress. I have watched many wonderful videos of people on YouTube that have stripped these machines down to every last part, rebuilt them, cleaned them, painted them, ground them, whatever had to be done to not only bring them back into a good appearance, but into good operating condition. Do I intend to do that? No. I've got too many lathes, too little time, and it won't be so terribly long before I'll be taking my final dirt nap. It's really nice to have a parts breakdown like this with exploded views, so see if you can get yourself one of those either on Vintage Machinery site if it's available for your model, or you can buy one on eBay or whatever. But it's nice to have that. Remember that you're not going to be able to get factory parts, but you'll still find on eBay some people that have OEM parts that came when they went to the auction in South Bend, Indiana, when they sold out millions and millions of parts. So some of those are still floating around, but generally you're going to have to either make the parts or recondition your parts or settle for used parts on eBay. But if you were to buy something like another screw or another nut and it's used, it would probably just be as worn as this and useless. So be careful of used parts. I have also seen many people that are buying older lathes as parts lathes, and this might be a parts lathe, although you can see that many of the parts would be useless. Well, I've got my work ahead of me. I'm at least going to clean this up, and I got to put it back together, whatever I took apart here for this demonstration. And I hope this helps you greatly as you look for lathes on eBay or Craigslist or your newspaper or auctions or whatever to help evaluate equipment before you spend good dollars on it. And you can see that I had some major disappointments myself revealed to me even today as I speak, let alone as I played around with this the last few months. I've only owned this for about 6 months, I believe it is. And most of my accurate work is done on my closing lathe, so it's of no great consequence to me if this lathe is not accurate, because it'll soon be in the hands of others within a decade, certainly, maybe less. So hope this video was helpful to you and I haven't gabbed too much. And this is tubalcain saying so long for now, and I'll see you in my next video.